Be'ezrat Hashem, we begin today Hilchos Milah, the laws of circumcision. This is the final set of halachot in this second book of the Rambam. We're approaching quickly the end of the second book, as we'll see right after we finish this next set of laws. There's another part to this book. It's not a specific section, but the Rambam covers all the prayers that we say during the entire year. So technically we're reaching the end, but not just yet. And it's a short set of halachot, just 3 chapters, as the Rambam always does. He begins by telling us which mitzvahs of the 613 mitzvahs will be covered in this set of halachot. And the Rambam says, mitzvat aseh achat. Like many of the sections of laws in this book, it only covers one mitzvah, one positive mitzvah, vihi, which is lamul hazcharim beyom shmini, to circumcise our male children on the 8th day of their life. Ubiyur mitzvazu biprakim elu. The explanation of this mitzvah will come about in the following 3 chapters. Says the Rambam, Perek Rishon, Chapter 1, Halacha Aleph. Milah mitzvat aseh shechayavin aleha karet. Bris Milah, the mitzvah of circumcising our sons, is a positive commandment that's unique in that we are liable to excision, to karet, for not fulfilling it. Typically, the punishment of karet is only given for mitzvot lo taseh, for negative commandments. When you violate a negative commandment, certain ones, the severe ones, you get karet. Milah is one of 2 positive commandments for which you're obligated to get karet in the case where you don't fulfill it. The other one is not bringing a korban pesach in time. Shene'emar, as it says, and this is the verse on the screen here, ve'arel zachar asher lo yimol et besar orlato. If there is a male who is an arel means not circumcised, and he will not circumcise, he will not cut the flesh of his foreskin, v'nichreta hanefesh ahi me'ameha, that's the key words in the verse, that soul will be cut off from its nation. Why? The verse concludes that Briti Hefar, because he has violated, he has broken my covenant. It's curious that Rambam should begin a set of laws with this statement. Typically we see that Rambam tells us what the obligation is or who is obligated in this mitzvah. Here the Rambam just begins with this major declaration that Milah is so strict that you're obligated, you're liable for karet. The Rebbe explained once, because the Rambam is trying to communicate to us how bris milah gets to the heart of a Jew's connection with God. It's so important that for violating it, for not keeping it, one's soul gets cut off from Hashem. That's how important milah is. And the Rambam is going to develop this concept later on, towards the end of the halachot. We'll see how the Rambam describes again and again how the brit milah is the core of our connection to Hashem. And so right in the beginning, the Rambam hints to this connection by telling us how severe it is that not keeping this mitzvah leads to karet. Umitzvah al ha'av lamul et beno. The ideal mitzvah is for every father to personally circumcise his son. V'al harav lamul et avadav, or the master to circumcise his slaves. Yelid bayit umiknat kesef, both those that are born in his possession and those that are acquired by him after their birth. The Rambam will soon define what's considered a slave that's born to you, what's considered a slave that's acquired to you. But in this case, they don't have a Jewish father. They're slaves, they're born from non-Jews, but because they're in the Jewish possession, the master has the obligation to circumcise them. Avar ha'av o ha'adon v'lo ma'alotan. If the father transgresses the mitzvah, or the master transgresses the mitzvah, and does not circumcise the children or the slaves, bitel mitzvah taseh, he has canceled, he has not kept the positive commandment. However, ve'eno chayav karet. We cannot obligate the father or the master to be cut off from their people. She'ena karet talui ela be'arel atzmo. The excision is dependent not on the person that should give the circumcision, but on the baby, the child himself. As the verse says, ve'arel zachar, it's the male who remains uncircumcised that will get cut off. And so, while the father may have neglected to fulfill his duty, ultimately when the kid grows up, it's his responsibility to get himself a brit, and if he does not do it, then he is the one who is liable to karet. Ubeidin, mitzuvim lamul oto haben o ha'eved bizmano. Ideally, if the father shirks his responsibility or the master doesn't want to take his duty, the high court of the time has to take matters into their own hands and circumcise this child or this slave in the proper time. That they should not leave an uncircumcised boy among the Jewish people or among their slaves. However, if the kid grows up and Beit Din doesn't intervene, like I said before, he's the one who takes the responsibility. Halacha bet en malin beno shel adam shelo midato. We never circumcise the son of a child without his consent, without his knowledge, unless in the case described in the last halacha where the person purposely transgressed and withheld himself from giving his son a circumcision. In that case, a Beit Din will give him circumcision without his against his will. If this child was lost from the eyes of Beit Din, they didn't know about the case that this child didn't get a brit, and therefore they did not give him a circumcision. When the child grows up, he will be obligated to circumcise himself. Every single day which passes, the moment he reaches maturity, which is the age of bar mitzvah, and he does not give himself a circumcision, every passing day he is nullifying, he is canceling a positive commandment. Interestingly, we can never obligate, we can never punish a person with excision until he dies in the state of being an arel, on purpose. Because every single day you can't say, oh, today you're going to get karet. Maybe you would have done it tomorrow, maybe you would have done it the next day. Once the person dies, then we give him karet. Now this is a bit puzzling because karet, we're used to understanding, is a punishment to die early. So if there's no karet till you die, what is the karet in this case? So the commentaries explain that here the Rambam is referring to his own interpretation of karet. If you remember at the end of the first book of the Rambam said that karet is a punishment which is imposed upon the soul after death. That instead of the soul being able to go to the ultimate world of souls, the soul gets cut off and does not get to participate in that. That's the karet being referred to over here. We let the person live out his full physical life. If purposely he chooses not to undergo the Brit Milah, then when he passes on to the next life, his soul will be cut off from that future life. Halacha Gimel, Echad Evet Shenolad B'Reshut Yisrael. Let's talk about slaves. Both a slave who is born into the possession of a Jew, the Echad Evet Hanilkach Min Hakutim, or a slave who is bought from the Gentiles, Chayav Harav Lamulotan, the master is obligated to circumcise them both. Ella, with one difference between them. Sheyilid Bayit Nimol Lishmona. A slave who is born within the possession of the Jew has to undergo circumcision like a Jewish child on the 8th day of his life. Omiknat Kesef, however, the acquired slave, Nimol Bayom Shenilkach, is circumcised on the day he is acquired. Typically that happens later in his life. He's born, a couple of days go by, a couple of weeks go by, then you buy him as a slave. But the Rambam adds, Afilu lekacho bayom shenolad. Even if you bought the baby on the day he was born, Nimol biyomo, he should undergo the Brit Milah on that day. That's the one exception. We talk about Brit being on the 8th day. The one time Brit's not on the 8th day is when a slave is acquired from outside the Jewish people during one of the first 7 days of his life. We give him the Brit on that day. What happens to the danger of the Brit? I tried looking it up, I'm not so sure. But obviously the Torah guarantees that in that case, the danger that usually exists in the first week of life doesn't apply in that case. Halacha Dalet. Even though the general rule is that Yilid Bayit, a born slave, is 8th day, and a acquired slave is on its day, says the Rambam, nevertheless, Yesh Miknat Kesef Shenimol Lishmona. There is a case of an acquired baby who will have to wait till 8 days of his life to get the Brit. The Yesh Yilid Bayit Shenimol Bayom Shenolat. And on the other hand, there is a baby born within your possession, and he will nevertheless undergo the Brit on the very day that he is born. Ketzad, how is this? Lakach shivcha v'lakach ubara ima v'yalda. Let's say you had bought yourself a maidservant who was pregnant, and you also acquired the rights to the fetus. Then she gave birth. So in a way, the fetus is miknat kesef, because you bought the woman while she was pregnant. However, this baby, when he will be born, will undergo his Brit at 8 days into his life. Even though technically on the bill of sale it says that you bought the woman separately and her baby, her fetus separately, so in that way the fetus is himself a miknat kesef. He was bought by your money. Since you bought the mother before he was born, and so in that way he is kind of Yalid Bayit, he's born into your house, so he undergoes the Brit at 8 days old. On the other hand, what if you bought a woman only with the intent of acquiring her fetuses? You only bought the rights to the woman insofar as her fetuses are concerned. Or you acquired a maidservant and you expressly said your desire that you're not going to have her go into the mikvah. As a slave, typically when a Jew acquires a slave, there's a kind of a mini conversion that the slave has to undergo. You put him in the mikvah, it's called l'shem avdut. You put him in the mikvah with the intent for servitude, and then he becomes a quasi-Jew. So you bought this non-Jewish maidservant, and you said, I am not going to put her in a mikvah. I'm going to keep her in her Gentile status completely. So then, let's say she becomes pregnant, or she was pregnant. Afal pisha nolad birshuto, even though these babies, the baby of the woman that you bought only insofar as her babies are concerned, or the baby of the woman who you bought with the express intent not to make her into a quasi-Jew, even though they're born in your possession, nimol bayom shanolat, they can be considered as a miknat kesef, bought with your money, and they will be circumcised on the day that they're born. Because this newborn baby, the moment he comes into the world, it's as though he alone was acquired with your money, and you bought him today. Because his mother is not counted among Jewish maidservants, to consider her son born in your home. And if the mother went to the mikveh after she gave birth, retroactively the status of this baby reverts to being a yelid bayit, and now he would get the bris at 8 days old. The commentators here argue, they say no, only if the mother would have gone to the mikveh before she gave birth, then that would transform her fetus into a yelid bayit and get the bris at 8 days. But if the baby, was already born, and he already got the status of miknat kesef according to halacha, requiring a brit on the day, even if his mother chooses to go to mikveh afterwards, doesn't help. But the Rambam nevertheless rules 8 days old is the bris. Halacha vav. Lakach eved gadol min ha'akum. If you bought an already mature adult as a slave from the goyim, v'lo ratzah ha'eved lamul. This kid, he's 14 years old, comes into your property, says, no, I don't want to have a bris. Megalgalini mo kol 12 chodesh. Okay? We let it go 12 months. Talk about it with him, discuss it, roll along with him for 12 months. Yater al ken asur lekaymo kishuhu arel. But more than 12 months, you cannot keep him in your possession if he remains uncircumcised. Ela chozer u'mochro le'akum. You must sell him to another non-Jew, back to the Gentiles. But if you made an express condition, a stipulation, while he was still in the possession of his non-Jewish master, that you're not planning to give him a bris, since that stipulation was made, when you bring him into your possession, you can keep him uncircumcised. Ubilvad, provided that he accepts upon himself the 7 mitzvahs that all Noahides were commanded, and he will thereby be like a ger toshav. A ger toshav is called a resident convert. That's a non-Jew who wants to live in Israel, accepts upon himself to keep all 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach, does not serve idols anymore, and lives among us. This slave who takes upon himself the Sheva mitzvot becomes like a ger toshav. Not exactly the same. The Rogachover Gaon explained that there's some differences between them. That's why the Rambam writes, V'yiyeh ki ger toshav. He's like a ger toshav, not an actual one. But nevertheless, practically, he keeps the same laws as the ger toshav. Avalim lo kibel alav sheva mitzvot. But if he would not take upon himself the 7 mitzvot, in other words, you made the stipulation, I'm not going to give him a bris. Then he comes to your property and he says, I'm not keeping the 7 mitzvahs, yehareg miyad. Not only can you not keep him, you must kill him right away. Because that's the law. We're going to see in the very end of the Rambam, in the 14th book, close to the very end of the last section of Halachot, the Rambam discusses the laws of how Jews should treat Bnei Noach, Noahides, when they're under our jurisdiction. And one of the principles over there is that if a non-Jew doesn't keep Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, that makes him liable right away to execution. So here too, he came into your possession. He's saying, I'm not going to keep the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach, so he deserves to be killed. The Rambam gives us the caveat. An actual ger toshav, an actual resident convert, can only be accepted at the time when Yovel was applicable, which was only in the times of the temple, when all Jews were living in Israel. Nowadays, we wouldn't have a regular ger toshav. We could have this situation of kig ger toshav, like the resident convert, but the actual ger toshav would not exist. Now, I should point out that the Ravid over here says we don't kill people of our own volition. He argues with the Rambam. He says, no, Yehareg miyad, you say be killed. No, we cannot kill him. However, the Rebbe explains that he's not arguing on the fact that the person must accept the 7 mitzvahs. This slave has to accept 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach. It's just that right now, technically we can't kill him because we're not in jurisdiction, we're not in power. But in principle, the acceptance of the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach is integral to being able to acquire this slave. The Rebbe even goes so far as to say that it could be that the Ravid will argue with the Rambam, he'll be even more stringent and won't even allow for the 12-month discussion period. And the Rambam says you have 12 months, then you see da-da-da. The Ravid would say, no 12 months discussion. Today, the only way we can determine whether you're going to come into this property or not is if you accept upon yourself, be that as it may, that's the law for buying an adult slave. If a convert wants to enter the community of Israel, first he has to get a bris. One of the 3 parts of conversion is getting a bris. If he would have already undergone a circumcision when he was a Gentile, we have to do what's called hatafat dam brit, extracting a little bit of blood. On the day he goes through conversion, we make another wound in that area, extract some blood, so it's as though he's doing another bris. Same thing would apply to a child who was born already circumcised, he has no foreskin. On the 8th day, you still must do something to resemble the Brit. By the way, I didn't show it before, but this is the actual verse where we learn the mitzvah of Brit from. It says in Parshat Hazriya, Ubayom hashmini yimol besar orlato. On the 8th day, we cut off the flesh of one's foreskin. Even though much earlier in history, by Avraham Avinu, was where you have all the verses, talk about Brit Milah and all the special laws, even the one I showed before, about the karet, is written by Avraham Avinu. Nevertheless, the mitzvah, the source for a mitzvah, can only be found after Matan Torah. All the other conditions that Hashem communicates before can be applied, but only once you have a verse which shows that after the giving of the Torah, we have the bris as a commandment. The Rambam writes this famously in his commentary to the Mishnah, that every mitzvah which we do today, we only do because Moshe Rabbeinu got it on Mount Sinai. Even the mitzvahs that are described in the Torah earlier, we got them again after Matan Torah. Anyway, so here we see a child born without a foreskin still needs to undergo some type of bris. Androgynos, or hermaphrodite. That's a baby that's born, sheyesh lo zachrut kezachar, v'nakvut kinekeva. He has both genitalia, male and female. Tzarich lamul oto bashmini. Because he has male genitalia, that has to be circumcised on the 8th day. V'chein yotzei dofen, so too a baby born from cesarean section, literally means it goes out of the wall. In other words, he's born by operation, from the stomach, not naturally. Umi sheyesh lo shtei orlot. And somebody who has 2 foreskins either means 2 layers of foreskin on one genitals, or he actually has 2 separate organs. So they have to both, malin et shtehen bashmini, both must be circumcised on the 8th day. Halacha chet, en malin leolam ela bayom, achar alot hashemesh. Bris milah can only take place by day, after sunrise. Ben bayom hashmini, shu zmana, whether it's being done in its ideal form on the 8th day, which is the proper time, ben shalo bizmana, or whether it's done not in its proper time, shu mitshi vahala, which is on the 9th day and forward. Let's say a kid was sick. We'll see later you delay a bris. A kid is born between sunset and nightfall. Sometimes you have to delay the bris. So you're doing it on the technical 9th day. Still, it has to be by day. In other words, you don't say, maybe once the 8th day passes, get it done right away, even by night. No, it must be by day. Shenemar, as it says, the verse over here, bayom hashmini, on the 8th day, which means bayom v'lo by day and not by night. Mal misha'ala amud hashachar. If you did the bris before sunrise, but it was already after dawn, kasher, that's still kosher after the fact. The chol hayom kasher lamilah, all day is kosher for bris, va'afal pi mitzvah lahagdim mitchat hayom, nevertheless it's a mitzvah to make it as early as possible during the day. Shezrizin makdimin la mitzvot, because those that have alacrity, those that are quick, always do mitzvahs as early as they can. I should point out that today, many people have a custom to do a bris later in the day when they can get more family together. That's because of the principle of berov am hadrat melech. More people there are, the greater the king, God's honor, is. And so the principle of berov am hadrat melech overrides zrizin makdimin lo mitzvot, and therefore you would have some people who would prefer to do a brit later in the day, when bigger crowds, than earlier in the day and a smaller crowd. Halachat tet, milah bizmana dochet hashabat. A bris milah, when performed in its proper time, in other words, on the 8th day, it overrides the Shabbos. Even though on Shabbos you cannot do surgeries, you cannot inflict any wounds, for a bris you may. But if a bris is being done not in its proper time, then it does not override neither Shabbos or Yom Tov. In other words, if a baby is sick and the first possible day to do a bris is on Shabbos or Yom Tov, we don't say, let's do it today. No, you wait till the next day. Ubein bizmana, ubein shelo bizmana. Whether a bris is being done in its proper time or not, docha et hatzarat. It does override something else. It overrides tzarat. Tzarat are skin lesions. They used to appear miraculously on people's skin for talking in Lashon Hara. And one of the averot that's associated with tzarat is what it says in the Parsha. In a couple of weeks we're coming to it, Parshat Ki Teitzei. It says, Hishamer benega hatzarat. Beware of the tzarat lesion. And the explanation of that is, the beware is a prohibition against cutting off the skin which has the lesion. So if you have a lesion appear on your hand, you cannot surgically remove it and then say, oh, I don't have tzarat anymore. That's forbidden. So let's say a boy is born with tzarat on his foreskin. So you have a prohibition against cutting off the tzarat, but you have a positive commandment to cut off the foreskin. So the Rambam says, whether the brit is being performed in its proper time or not, it overrides the tzarat. Keitzad, how does this look? If there was a baheret is like the generic name for a white lesion, on the skin of the foreskin, chotcha im ha'orla, you can cut it together with the foreskin. Even though typically cutting off a lesion of tzarat is violating a prohibition, a negative commandment, the principle in halacha, all of Jewish law, and here as well, is that a positive commandment overrides a negative one. By the way, I should note, we saw in Hilchos tzitzit that this rule only applies if you can't do both. But if you could do both, then do both. Here, there's no way around it. You have to cut off the foreskin, and by that, you're going to be cutting off the tzarat. So because of that, the positive overrides the negative. Halacha Yud Kishem Shemilat Habanim Dochat HaShabbat. The same way that circumcising your children overrides the Shabbos, Kach Milat HaAbadim, so too does circumcising your slaves override the Shabbos, Sheheni Molim Lishmona. If it's those category of slaves that are being circumcised on the 8th day, Dochat HaShabbat Imchal Shmini Shalahen B'Shabbat. It overrides the Shabbos if the 8th day fell out on Shabbos. Chutz Milid Bait. Shalot Havla Imo Ad Sheyalda, with one exception. That kind of funny exception we had before. A baby is born in your possession, but the mother didn't go to mikveh until she gave birth. Even though he will undergo the bris at 8 days old, because he transforms his status from being miknat kesef to yilid bayit once his mother undergoes the conversion, as we discussed before. But nevertheless, he is in this way, he is like the baby who should get the bris on the original day of his birth, and therefore, Eino dochet Shabbat, his bris does not override the Shabbos, and the same holds true for anybody of those slaves that has to be given their circumcision on the day that they're born, doesn't override the Shabbos. Halacha Yud Aleph Katan Shenolad Keshehu Mahu. A baby born when he already has a bris, no foreskin. Umisha Nolad B'Chodesh Hashmini Li'iburo. And a baby that was born at the 8th month of his pregnancy, Kodem Shetigamer Briato, before his creation is fully formed. We're going to see later, Shu Kenefel, which he is considered to be a stillborn because he will not live. In halacha, we talk about two viable types of birth: full-term gestation, 9 months, and 7 months. The sages had a Kabbalah that a baby that's born to 7 months could live. But if a baby is born between 7 and 9, the 8th month, it's considered to be a preemie, and it will not last. And to the point that there's even much more extreme rules. We'll see later. You can't even move him on the Shabbos, etc. So if a baby was born on the 8th day of his pregnancy, before his creation is fully formed, and he has the status of a stillborn, v'yotzei dofen, and a cesarean section, v'androginos and hermaphrodite, and somebody that has 2 foreskins, en dochinat Shabbat. All of these cases, these unusual cases, their brit, or their hatafat dam brit, the extraction of the blood, does not override the Shabbos, and they will have the bris on Sunday, which would be the 9th day of their life. Halacha Yud Bet, Mishan Nolad Ben Hashmashot. A person who was born what's called ben hashmashot. That means safek bayom, safek balayla. It's a doubt whether it's daytime or nighttime. It's the time between sunset and nightfall. When we learned Hilchot Kriyat Shema, I showed you twice that page of the Zmanim, of halachic times. The day begins at sunrise and ends at sunset. But before sunrise, there's a kind of a doubtful time, which is from alot hashachar, from dawn till sunrise. And at the end of the day, after sunset, before nightfall, before actual what's called tzit kochavim, before the stars come out, there's a time period which is called Ben Hashmashot. We're not sure if it's day or it's night. So if a kid is born on Ben Hashmashot, Monin min halayla, we have to assume that you go later. You say, it's already the night, it's already the next day. And therefore, he gets the bris on the 9th day of his life, which could be the 8th day of his life. In other words, if the day that he was born, the time that he was born, is considered part of the day, let's say he's born on Sunday. Okay? So the brit should really be the next Sunday. But because he's born on Sunday going into Monday, maybe it's Monday. So we can only give him the brit on the next Monday, which would assuming that he was born on Sunday, it would be the 9th day of his life. Let's say he's born on Friday, going into Shabbos ben hashmashot. Now, if you follow this principle, you're going to end up making a leniency. You're going to end up overriding the Shabbos. Why? Because you're going to say he's born on Friday evening. Let's consider him to be born on Shabbos, and the bris will happen the next Shabbos. You can't override Shabbos for doubt. Says the Rambam, Eino dochet haShabbat. If he's born on Friday ben hashmashot, he does not override the Shabbos. Ela nimol be'echad b'Shabbat. You will give him the bris on the next day, Sunday, she'ein dochin et haShabbat misafek, because we never override Shabbos out of doubt. Halacha Yud Gimel Mishan Nolad b'chodesh hashmini. Oh, here's the topic I mentioned before. A baby born in the 8th month of gestation, im haya shalem bisaro b'tzipornav. If he was already complete in his form, hair had formed, nails had fully formed, harei zeh valad shalem uben shiv'ahu ela shenishtaha. We consider him to be a full baby, but not because 8 months is a full term, but because this baby was probably subject to the 7-month gestation. He just got delayed a little bit in the uterus. Didn't come out yet, till 8 months. And therefore, mutar l'tatalo b'Shabbat. You can move him on Shabbos, he's not muktzeh. Ve'eino ka'even, he isn't considered to be like a stone. Umalin oto b'Shabbat, and we can give him a bris on Shabbos if he's born on a Shabbos. Aval im noladu saro lakui, but if this 8-month-old baby is born, with his hair looking incomplete, and his nails aren't complete as they should be when they're created, this baby is considered to be an 8-month-old gestation, who was supposed to be born in 9 months, and he came out prematurely. He came out before he was completed, and therefore halachically is considered to be like a stone. And because he will not live, you cannot move him on the Shabbos. Nevertheless, if this baby survived for 30 days, he is considered to be a baby that will exist, a baby that will last, a healthy baby, and is considered like any other healthily born child, because once he survives 30 days by a human fetus, he is no longer considered to be a stillborn. However, the brit, which happens at the 8th day, by that time you will not have determined yet whether he will be a surviving baby, and therefore you cannot give him a bris on Shabbat. I should point out that today we don't give the halachic status to an 8-month-old baby like they used to. Today we have much more advanced technology. We're able to keep these babies alive for much longer. And so they don't have the laws of muktzeh, etc. They still have the laws of not giving them a bris on Shabbos, but that's also technical. Like most doctors won't let the bris happen in the case of a premature birth, so it will never come to that. But you should just know that this halachic differentiation, by and large, no longer exists. Halacha Yudalid Mishan Nolad b'chodesh hashvi'i li'ibura. A baby born in the 7th month of his pregnancy, im nolad shalem, if he was born complete, fully formed, harei zeh valad shel kayama, he can be considered a surviving healthy baby, umalin oto b'Shabbat, to the point that you'll give him a bris even on Shabbos. Safek ben shiva, safek ben shmona, if you're in doubt whether he's a 7-month-old or an 8-month-old, malin oto b'Shabbat al kol panim. We give him a bris on Shabbos regardless. Im ben shivahu, typically you would say out of doubt you don't override the Shabbos, right? The 7-month-old can get a bris on Shabbos, the 8-month-old can't. But over here, when you're in doubt, 7 or 8, you give him a bris regardless. Why? Im ben shivahu v'shalemhu. Let's say he's a 7-month-old baby and he's fully formed. B'dino sheyidche Shabbat. So rightfully he's overriding the Shabbos. A 7-month-old gestation, fully formed baby gets a bris on Shabbos. The im ben shmonahu. Listen to the Rambam. Says the Rambam, if he's 8 months old and you choose to give him a bris, harei zeh shemal ki mechatech basarhu. Because this baby is going to be a stillborn, destined to die, giving him the bris isn't considered to be inflicting a wound on a living being. It's literally considered halachically, dryly, legally, cutting flesh. You're allowed to cut meat on Shabbos to serve it. So you're cutting meat, unfortunately, in the case of this not surviving baby. Because if he's an 8-month-old truly, then he's a stillborn. He doesn't have the halachic status of a viable baby. Let's say a fetus stuck out his entire head outside the mother's uterus, ben hashmashot, during this time of twilight. Even though in the end, the full extent of the baby's body emerged on the Shabbos, ein malinoto b'Shabbat. You cannot give him a bris on Shabbos out of the other doubt, that maybe this twilight time is part of Friday, and now by giving him a bris on Shabbos, it'll be the 9th day of his life. You don't do a bris on Shabbos on the 9th day. And therefore, you don't give him a bris on Shabbos. Here the Rambam is just telling us that the definition of birth is crowning. As soon as the baby's head emerges, it's done. The the principle follows that anybody whose bris does not override the Shabbos also does not override the first day of a holiday. So, let's say a baby was born. Let's say Sukkot was on Sunday. Okay, for argument's sake. Sukkot was on Sunday. It can't really happen, so that's not such a good example. Shavuot. Okay, that could happen. Shavuot could be on a Sunday. So you have a baby who's born Friday, Ben Hashmashot, the week before Shavuot. Okay? Friday evening going into Shabbos. So, we say, because the kid is born Ben Hashmashot, he cannot get a bris the next Shabbos. Because that next Shabbos might be the 9th day of his life. Maybe he was born Friday, and on the 9th day we don't give a bris on Shabbos. Okay? Push it to Sunday. Sunday is Yom Tov. Sunday is the holiday. Because he doesn't override the Shabbos, he doesn't override the first day of Yom Tov either. V'dochet Yom Tov Sheni. But he does override the second day of holiday. Now Shavuot is 2 days. So you won't give him a bris on Shabbos, the day before Shavuot. You won't give him a bris on Sunday, the first day of Shavuot. But you will give him a bris on Monday, the second day of Shavuot. Ubishnei amim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah. But if it's the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, eino doche lo et harishon v'lo et hasheni. Then, because the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah are considered to be one unit, and we'll see more about this later in the third book of the Rambam, why Rosh Hashanah is different. But Rosh Hashanah, the 48 hours become one unit. And so, if you don't override the first day, you don't override the second day either. Okay, this doesn't happen nowadays in the calendar, but let's say Rosh Hashanah fell out to be Sunday and Monday. So in the case I mentioned above, if a baby would be born Friday in twilight, a week before Rosh Hashanah, so you can't give him a bris on the Shabbos the day before Rosh Hashanah because that might be the 9th day. You can't give him a bris on Sunday, that's the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And because Rosh Hashanah is one big unit, you can't give him a bris on Monday either, so he only will end up having the bris on Tuesday, the 12th day of his life. Same applies if it's a bris that's not being done in its proper time. Let's say the baby was sick, it was delayed, and the first day that you can do a bris is on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. No. It doesn't push off either of the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. You give him a bris on the following day. A baby who is sick. We do not give him a bris till he becomes healthy. And it's not like the moment he's healed, now we give him a bris right away. No, the moment he's declared healthy, we wait now 7 sets of 24 hours. Shivaya meit le'et means 24-hour cycles. So whatever time he was declared healthy, 12 p.m., 7 days later, 12 p.m., that's when we can do a bris. And then you give him a bris. And what are we talking about that we count the 7 days? If he was caught by high fever, and anything like it. But if it was lighter sickness of the eyes, let's say his eyes were hurting, the moment his eyes open and are healed, you give him a bris right away. And in any similar situation, the same rule would apply. A light sickness, as soon as he's declared healthy, you give him a bris. A baby was found to be jaundiced, very yellow, on his 8th day of his life. Happens a lot, even today. The idea of jaundice described in the Talmud is that the blood hasn't yet spread fully to the edges of the skin. And so you have to wait, you cannot give him a bris, till the blood expands to that area. And his appearance will return to being like that of normal newborn children. Similarly, if it was the opposite, the baby was too red. Here's an example I found online. A baby that's born with extremely, extremely red skin, the blood is literally at the surface of the epidermis. It hasn't settled yet into the body as much as it should. Is very red. Looks like he was painted. That's how red he is. You don't give him a bris till the blood is swallowed, is absorbed into his body. And again, his appearance should revert to being like normal newborn children. That's a sickness. Red is a sickness. You must be very careful about these matters. It could literally lead to death. If a woman gave a circumcision to her firstborn son, and unfortunately, tragically, this baby died as a result of the brit. It weakened its strength, and that's it. It passed away. She had a second boy. She gave a brit as well to him, and he died also as a result, tragically, of the Brit Milah. Ben min Balah Harishon, Ben min Balah Hasheni. Doesn't matter whether these two boys were from the same husband or from two different husbands. She has two kids who passed from Milah. You never, at the third baby, you never give him a bris at the proper time. You wait till he grows up a little bit, till he gets a little stronger. The general guiding principle is we do not give a bris except to a child who has zero sickness. Why, says the Rambam? Because danger to one's life pushes away everything. It's possible to give a bris later, but it's impossible to return a lost soul. You kill somebody, then he's dead. You delay the bris, it's delayed. He'll have it later. The Rebbe explains even deeper. In a way, one could say that the Rambam is saying 2 points here. Sakanat nefashot tocha et hakol is number one, and number two, you can do a bris later. What is the Rambam adding when he says you can do a bris later? That in a way, according to the Rambam, when you do a bris later out of fear for health concerns, you're actually not really delaying the bris. And when the bris will be done in the proper time, it will be considered retroactively to have been done in the proper time. And that's hinted in the Rambam's words. You know, that line really is the opposing line to the first line. Sakanat nefashot tochet hakol, and you can't bring a kid back. It's not the opposite of doing a bris on time. You know, you could do a bris later, but you can't bring a kid back. Those two are not exactly opposites. It's more like sakanat nefashot pushes away everything, and if you don't, then this kid's going to die, it'll never be brought back. The Rambam, when he uses this language, he's telling us a little hint. You can do the bris later, but efshar lahachazir, you could never undo, you could never retract, you could never take away the connection that Nefesh Achat MiYisrael has with Hashem. The Brit's whole idea is to illuminate, is to reveal, is to manifest physically the connection we have with God at our essence. That doesn't go away. The bris will be today, the bris will be tomorrow. You can't undo the connection a Jew has to God. So better if you need to, when the child is sick, wait till he's healthy to perform the bris and retain that essential connection of every single baby with God the Creator. But again, that's more of a drush, more of a homiletic interpretation. The literal meaning of the Rambam is over here, that the Rambam is telling us that sakanat nefashot pushes away everything, and it should even override this sickness. And another explanation that Rebbe once said, that the Rambam over here is also telling us a major principle. You know, every Brit Milah can bring to danger. Every Brit Milah makes a baby sick. But the difference is that over here, the baby is already in a state of danger. When you're in a case of sakanat nefashot, that pushes away everything. If it's talking about bringing potentially somebody to a sakana, in that case, the mitzvah of Brit Milah guarantees us that we can override it and Hashem will protect the kid. But once you've already come to the state of danger, you make sure that sakanat nefashot pushes away everything, because as the Rambam says, do the bris later, don't risk losing the life of a child, which you can never return. And of course, from here we learn that if one person who dies is considered to be so severe, that helping one Jew stay alive, physically and also spiritually, it also has the same exact tremendous amount of power, and the koach that we have of influencing just one Jew is absolutely tremendous and absolutely great.